Welcome. It's just gone 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Wednesday, the 7th of May, and you are watching episode 170 of Regional Wrap. Regional Wrap providing insight on the issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me on this episode, getting on the same page, is my guest, Anthony Dillon. Anthony is an honorary fellow at the Institute for Positive Psychology and Education at the Australian Catholic University in Sydney. As a social scientist and prominent commentator on Aboriginal affairs, he has had the opportunity to write on Aboriginal topics and mental health, both in academic journals and popular media. Anthony uses his qualifications and skills to question the orthodoxies and present ideas that are often unpopular. Sometimes he has been doing for more than 2 decades. He is most passionate about Aboriginal affairs and believes that political correctness, and in particular the stifling of free speech, has done and continues to do incalculable damage to the Aboriginal people. Most recently, Anthony has acted as a public intellectual to discuss the problems of the proposed Indigenous voice to Parliament. He fought passionately against the voice because he believed that the referendum, had it succeeded, there would have been even a bigger restrictions in what could be said on Aboriginal affairs. He has had several thought-provoking articles published in The Australian, The Conversation, Daily Telegraph, Herald Sun, and the ABC Drum Online. Welcome, Anthony.
Thank you.
Well, if we could get started, if you could give us a bit of an introduction to yourself in regards to your original haunts and some of your misspent youth.
Okay. Well, I come from just down the road from you, or is it up the road? Innisfail. That's where I was born, but I was only there for a couple of years, and then my family moved down to Brisbane. So Brisbane's my home, but I currently live in Sydney, and I've been down here in Sydney for 22 years. And growing up in Brisbane in the 60s and 70s was great. Two great extended families, Aboriginal father, non-Aboriginal mother. Life was pretty good for me. Went to uni, you graduate from school, went to uni, did a few different things, worked for a government department. And then later in life, I decided to delve into the social sciences, become a lecturer in that area. I gained a interest in Aboriginal affairs in my early 20s when I worked for Queensland Health, looking at all the data. So I combined that with my interest in psychology and the social sciences, and I would say as a hobby, become a commentator on Aboriginal affairs. I call it a hobby because it's not generally something I don't get paid for. I just put my articles out there and do interviews like this sort of thing, hoping to get a message out. And you summed it up earlier on when you described me in my bio. I just feel political correctness is holding Aboriginal people back, and there needs to be a quantum shift in the way we deal with Aboriginal affairs. So that's a little bit about me. Did you want more?
No, that's fine, but just about free speech. I mean, it is a big problem, but not just in Indigenous affairs, but it can, anyone who's critical of the narrative, whether it's the gay lobby or trans or anything, or even saying, even describing what a woman is, sort of thing. It's got to a ridiculous stage where you have to, choose your lines, sort of thing. And I mean, even our politicians are so weak in regards to getting out there, especially on the conservative side, mind you, which is quite of a worry. But I think free speech overall is under challenge all the time. We've had the misinformation and disinformation bills trying to be pushed through, and a lot of people don't also appreciate that originally started off with the coalition previously, and yet was reintroduced, of course, in the last Albanese government. but both sides don't seem to be really holding up their end to protect free speech.
Mm.
What's your feel in regards to the
Well,
need to sort of, get this free speech out there in the open on all sorts of issues?
yeah. And I guess the first thing that comes to mind is something that I've been talking about for a long time. There's this whole idea, well, if you want to just simply, if you want to shut down a conversation, if there's something you don't like hearing, and it could be a view that's counter to your views, and if you build your identity on your beliefs and views, well, then you're going to be very protective. You don't want anyone else to contradict them. So if you're that fragile, you don't like what other people say, it's so easy to say, I'm offended. And as soon as you say those magic words, I'm offended, suddenly people have got to uh, be quiet around you. They can't express their views and opinions around you. So, that whole nonsense of silencing a conversation because you claim to be offended, or and some people take it a step further where they'll see to get you cancelled, go speak to your employer and protest and all that sort of thing. So we've certainly lost the natural, what I would call the natural state of being able to hear different views and opinions to your own. So have someone else say something that runs counter to what you believe and be okay with it. You don't have to believe it, but think, okay, well, he has a different view to me. She thinks differently to me. That's okay. I feel secure in what I believe. We disagree. So let's debate it out. Let's, have a debate, discussion, see who's got the better idea. But there are some people, aren't interested in doing that. They don't want a debate. They don't want a discussion. They just want to shut you down. And one of the quickest, easiest ways to do that is to shout, I'm offended.
I think that goes back to sort of pre-Abbott days or Julia Gillard's with Section 18C, human rights thing, and it put in there that if it offends someone, then you're in trouble, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But it's such a vague thing. It's not a real quantifiable thing. Not like defamation or slander, where it's a matter of truth, sort of thing,
Mm.
and can be tested in court. The person's being offended is a very vague and criteria. What offends one person doesn't necessarily, doesn't even bother someone else. So it becomes subjective. And I think that's something that should be avoided in all sort of legislation when there's a subjective rather than a measure of accuracy required.
It's like looking at a sculpture in the museum or the art gallery. Someone can say it's beautiful, another person can say it's absolutely disgusting or pornographic or something. It's, you see what you want to see. And with offense is always taken, never given. If you're offended, it's because you've actively taken the offense.
And I think it's also what that's done is allowed lawfare to come into general conversation. So as soon as someone says something, someone can run down to the Human Rights Commission with no cost to them,
Mhm.
but put in a complaint and have the armies of the government basically, go and sort of bang on your door and drag you off to court, sort of thing.
Mm.
And even if it's not substantiated, the costs are frightening to defend yourself.
Yeah, you're punished by the process. Um,
That's it. Um, just
and just adding one point to that too is you can also run off to a doctor, a psychiatrist, a therapist, and you can tell them how traumatized you are by what that person said, and they will validate you and say, yeah, I can see how traumatized you are, and this has impacted on your mental health, blah blah blah.
and you probably can get a disability pension to go with it.
Yeah. And in my opinion, it's the clinician who gave that advice. They're the one with the mental health problem.
Okay, just moving on. With Indigenous affairs, sort of, did you step into it gradually from your professional point of view and move into the commentator role just as opportunities came up, or was there a specific point in time or incident that sort of made you really take a step forward in that area?
Yeah, look, I'll give you the timeline. So in my 20s, I was working for Queensland Health, and I'd get to see all the data. This was when I was living in Brisbane, and I learned about the health inequalities for Aboriginal people, the problems they face. And I also at the same time got to read the policies and the programs and that on Aboriginal health and the view that was taken, the approach that was taken. And from an early time in the public service and in my 20s, I noticed one thing which was disturbing, and that was the rhetoric of basically, well, two things. Aboriginal people are still suffering from racism and colonisation. That's nonsense. And only Aboriginal people can fully understand Aboriginal people. Only they should be the ones allowed to help Aboriginal people. That's also nonsense. So there was those two things which I saw, which I did not like. So, I began to take an interest in Aboriginal affairs, having seen those things. And this was just before the internet come in. So I was having to rely on newspapers. Um, there wasn't much out there, but then, I'd write a few letters to the editor voicing my opinions. I, kind of started to develop my arguments, learning to write concisely. And then the internet come onto the scene. And, doing a bit of Googling and that, I discovered that, there was a lot more of this stuff around the country that only Aboriginal people can help Aboriginal people. And racism is apparently rampant and Aboriginal people are victims of colonisation. And I thought, well, that's strange. None of my father's family are victims of colonisation. My father, Australia's first Aboriginal police officer, and very highly ranked and regarded, didn't seem to have the victim mentality about him. And I, with the internet, I was able to find that there were also some other people who thought the same way I did. Not many in Australia, but at least overseas, there was a similar sort of thing with uh, race relations in America between black Americans and non-black Americans. And you had, more they were more advanced than us, but just you had people writing about similar sorts of things, saying that it's nonsense that they're owed reparations from slavery and all that sort of thing. So that was kind of comforting and disturbing that there were other people who had made similar observations, were writing similar things to what I was writing. And then and also, with this whole thing about only Aboriginal people can help Aboriginal people, that was my introduction to, I guess, identity politics. But before I'd even heard the term identity politics, before it was even known. And then with the takeoff with the internet, you're reading more, you're finding out more. I was able to get my articles published um, in places like the ABC Drum, of all places, who were very good to me. So even though they're kind of what I would consider left-leaning, they published a lot of my articles on the Drum, and that provided a good foundation for my writing skills, presenting my ideas. And I'm glad to see that those articles are still there. If you go to Google ABC Drum and my name. And the interesting thing is, here I am now I'm now 58, and we're in 2025. I think it is. We're in 2025. Of course, we just had an election. The ideas that I was writing in the Drum, ABC Drum, all those years ago, are pretty much the same ideas I have today. And the other thing I forgot to add to my interest in psychology, human behavior. I would study psychology, speak with a good friend, a psychologist, and we talk about human nature and that. And so I was able to use my knowledge on psychology to talk about victimhood status and how being in the victim position is quite a powerful one. When you play the victim, suddenly people have got to apologize and do things for you and that sort of thing. So I saw the victim mentality, and in with Indigenous people, Aboriginal people, where that victimhood was being played on, I'd refer to the victim brigade. And if they were the victims, well, then who was the oppressor? Of course, the oppressor had to be the white man, the non-Aboriginal Aboriginal people.
I think one of the other things that's very sort of has helped create this is the academic world, the
Oh,
academia.
absolutely, yeah.
Um, I subscribe to a information thing that comes off, and in regards to academia papers, some they just send you old ones and new ones at the same at various times, and the number of ones dealing with Aboriginal instances in history, there's a fair volume, and I don't think I've read one that sort of doesn't sort of play that the Aboriginal people have been completely disadvantaged, and there's no good stories, if you know what I mean. But if you come up, you've lived, although you didn't live here long, but people, if you're up on the tablelands I think it's somewhere near Millamilla. I think there's a statue there of an Indigenous and a white person who were mates exploring the area. And obviously that was a great bond. And there's a number of great bonds through history between the first settlers, especially explorers and things like that, and Indigenous people. But the thing that I suppose gets the coverage and makes the news and sells books is it's like everything. Bad news sells, sort of thing.
Oh,
It's the
absolutely.
bulk of our newspaper articles. So it seems the academia has been captured by let's tell these stories that capture, bad situation because media takes notice.
And that's why you'll hear stories about Aboriginal deaths in custody. Now, there's a lot more non-Aboriginal deaths in custody, but they don't make the news. Okay, when a non-Aboriginal person dies in custody, you generally don't hear about it. But when there's an Aboriginal death in custody, it gets publicised, and so therefore the naive public, if they only got their knowledge from newspapers and the popular media, they would think that it was only Aboriginal people who died in custody. When in actual fact, no, both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people, and a lot more non-Aboriginal people are dying in custody than Aboriginal Aboriginal people. But due to that media bias and trying to perpetuate the myth, you get that bias in reporting. So yeah, there's certainly a lot of bad news stories that they report on. Um, if an Indigenous person receives some bad service somewhere, they'll try and put the spin on it that it's, there's racism at play, and that does not do anything to help race relations. And when race relations are impaired, I believe it's Aboriginal people who suffer the most.
Well, I think the other thing is too, in a lot of those instances, there's activists that feed on that and then put it out there and almost cause riots. I mean, I think there was a death in custody in Western Australia not so long ago. I think a 17 or 18-year-old took his own life in jail, and there was quite a demonstration in that,
Mm.
but there was nothing bounced about the conversation in regards to, no one goes out of their way to sort of do harm, I don't think, in the system, but these things unfortunately do happen.
To both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal.
There are other things that sort of happen, if you go back into um, original back into colonial days and that, and you get the stories, like it with Arthur Phillip sort of thing with the first settlement and that. He had a reasonable sense of perception in regards to dealing with Indigenous people, and I think he was a fairly good person in regards to he made sure that people understood that the Indigenous people, like everyone else in Australia at that time, were British subjects
Mm.
and subject to fair, same treatment before the law.
Mm.
And some people sort of get the perception that things were harder on Indigenous people than they were on us. But if you go and look through the early accounts, there's things there where, some female convict, took something from a tent and she was hung. There was a time when there was 6 people, because things were fairly desperate at times as far as food and that went in the early settlement. There was 6 people charged with stealing food and stuff like that. Well, 5 of them were hung. So it was a different time, but a lot of people now sort of see all those injustices as per the standards of today, and that's just not realistic.
Yeah, and so certainly, a lot of things wrong, bad things happen, and yeah, certainly there's no denying that many Aboriginal people were displaced and lives were lost, and it certainly changed their lives forever. But in 2025 and even 2020 or 2015 or 2000 or whatever, to claim that any suffering Aboriginal people have is due to colonisation is just a complete lie, and it's not helpful to Aboriginal people. And why can I say it's a lie? Because there are many, many counterexamples which show that many Aboriginal people are doing quite well. And we know a couple of years ago, many of these Aboriginal people who are doing quite well were using their voices to tell the country that Australian Aboriginal people don't have voices. So that's quite ironic. So yeah, many Aboriginal people are doing well. Of course, many are not, undeniably. We know that. But the point I'm making is we can't keep blaming colonisation for why some are not doing so good. We got to look at those who are doing well. Why are they doing well? Find out the formula for success. And the formula for success for those Aboriginal people who are doing well is, of no surprise, the same formula for success for non-Aboriginal people who are doing well. Connect with
Education and
others,
work
work hard, get mentors, get a good education, be where the opportunities are. And of course, we know that with remote living, there's not as many opportunities there. So of course, Aboriginal people are going to be affected because there's more of them living in remote parts of Australia. And it's a remoteness problem, not an Aboriginal problem. And many years ago, 15 years ago, there was a story in The Australian by Nicholas Rothwell talking about Tony Abbott. And they were saying it's about place, not race. So trying to point out that, remote living has its challenges. And I'm not saying city living is ideal. We certainly have our problems in the cities. But we just know in remote areas, it is hard to have the sorts of services that you and I take for granted.
Well, just on that, it's quite interesting. There's a reasonable, according to the census, there's a reasonable population of people identifying or are Indigenous in Canberra.
Yeah.
Now, the average wage of people in Canberra is much higher than the national average.
Mm.
And then if you look at people, I would say people who are successful and have done well out of today's situations that you can take advantage of, you'd only have to look at Jodie Bourne, who's the chairwoman or chairperson of the NIAAs.
Yep.
So people can and do come through the system, long as that they're able to take advantage of the system. Of course, it's like a lot of people like Jodie Bourne. Their mother came out of the Kimberleys, went to the missions. Her mother was obviously not full blood. She married a white man, then sort of moved to Perth, went to university, went to Sydney, did all sorts of things, and over the years has managed to get herself into that position. And I think she was also she's also a noted artist as well. So there are pathways, but like you said, it's much more difficult the more remote you are in regards to getting out of that situation. And although people expect the government to do more for people in remote areas, it's still extremely difficult for the government to provide services, education, and that, not just to the Indigenous, but anyone who's in the remote areas. I mean,
Yeah,
there's plenty of people out there on those remote stations where the kids still depend on wireless schooling and
yeah,
things like that for most of their primary years. And
yeah,
then eventually, if they want something else, they have to go to boarding school.
yeah.
So, but
I'm
and that's
certainly
just
not.
that's
Yeah.
just a pathway that it just needs to be accepted. If in remote areas, you're going to have lots of disadvantages.
Yeah. I'm certainly not suggesting, mass exodus and move the people out, but just as, you were saying, we do have to consider these things carefully, that the reality is there's, away from those remote areas, there are many more opportunities, and certainly those remote areas have their beautiful aspects to them. But thinking, what's best for these people now and in the future and for the next generation below, we may have to think about, giving invitations, programs for them to move out of these areas. So I'm not saying let's just rip them out of the areas. It has to be done sensitively. And so that's one of the choices, have programs that can move the people to where the opportunities are, or invest in those areas if it's feasible. And as I said before, someone like Warren Mundine thinks that, a lot of these remote areas are feasible, that you can invest in them and create economy and that sort of thing. And he's more of an expert on that than what I am. But for those places where it's just not doable, we have to think about, okay, what can we do? And that will likely mean a sensitive and sensible exit strategy to move the people to where the opportunities are. And basically, those Aboriginal Australians who are doing well, generally there's two types. They were born into opportunities and good circumstances, like I was. My parents made sure that I had those opportunities, and neither of my parents had many opportunities when they were young, but they made sure that I was going to have opportunities. You're either born into those opportunities or you move to where those opportunities are. And so again, when we look at the voice advocates, but both on both sides, the yes and no camp, that's Warren and Jacinta, and then on the no, on the yes camp, Marcia Langton, Tom Calmer, and them, and all of them who have done very well for themselves, and they deserve all the success that they have. They're smart people. Uh, they've gone to where the opportunities are. And it's the same for, everyone else. You either, you're born into the right opportunities, circumstances, or you relocate to where they are.
Well,
We know there's many stories of Aussies, and Stan Grant is one where he talks about his father had to move the family around to where he could get work and provide for the family. And there's been many Indigenous and non-Indigenous people who do that. There's no opportunities where they are. They move to where the opportunities are.
I think that's just a natural thing for most people these days. You have to be mobile to get jobs because the workplace is changing so much on a yearly basis. There's some skills that disappear, new skills that are coming online and that.
Yeah.
But just going back, I don't know if we really have to move in a lot of instances, move people out of areas. I think the biggest problem is we've failed to develop Northern Australia.
Mm.
Tony Abbott, it's 10 years. This is the 10-year anniversary of the Abbott government's white paper for the development of Northern Australia. And we've seen next to nothing for it. But when you look at Northern Australia, we've got 80% of the mainland's rainfall. And how many dams have we got?
Mhm.
How much investment have we got in agriculture? Like, there's been great advances especially in things like cotton. There's dry area cotton has been developed. It's quite successful in Northern Territory, so it can be rolled. It should be rolled out across Northern Australia in general. We need to do something more with our water and sort of irrigation and those sort of things. All those sort of things that provide development provide opportunities for heaps and heaps of different communities.
Mm.
We've got lakelands up to north of Cairns, 100 odd kilometres north of Cairns. that's got heaps of potential for people around Cohen, and then you've got Cooktown and that as well. If the agriculture and those sort of things develop, there's opportunities there. Yes, in some instance, people are going to grain a lot, and there's plenty of uh, people who live down in Brisbane and have got great jobs. I don't know if you know, like people like Gene Tunney and that who runs Adept Economics. Well, he comes from Townsville, and like many people of his generation, when they were kids, it was just sort of a normal stature of things that you went down to Brisbane to go to the university down there. If you wanted a career in economics or or specialist sort of things.
Mm.
Yeah, but like I say, that's just been a general sort of thing. But if we can develop the north, there's opportunities for everyone.
Oh, I agree. And what I was saying before too, was that yes, there are some places in remote parts of Australia which, if you invest in them wisely, people like Warren Mundine believe that you can make uh, a good economy there. But there are some places where I think it's going to be very difficult.
Yeah, but the thing is, there's a lot of things out there where people aren't even using their imagination. That like
Sure.
if you look at there's a potential of Project Iron Boomerang, which has been around for ages and has never got a Guernsey from the government in regards to major project status, but a train line from basically running from Bowen through to Port Hedland, moving coal one way, iron ore the other way, going across the centre. Um, that that provides great opportunities in the future, but we're not even looking at those things, and that seems a bit of a shame to me. One, basically, it's denying development for that sort of people think that's a dead centre, but no. It's like anything. You provide an opportunity, people will take advantage of it. And the other thing is it's also a nation building project as well.
Yeah, agreed. And that's a area you know more about than me, but I don't disagree. In fact, I do agree with what you're saying.
I think the other thing too is the water capability in the north is something that's sort of under utilized or thought of. But the Nord River project, I think, is a proof of concept in regards to um, water storage, distribution, and irrigation and that. I mean, yes, it's been there since the 70s. It had a lot of teething problems because we didn't know a lot of things about the different pests in the ground and all that sort of thing. So there was a lot of trial and error. But one thing it has also improved, not only has it provided that economic development, it provided tourism, but the fact that they have basically two dams in the system that keep the constant level of water between the Argyle Dam and the irrigation downstream, you got 55 kilometres of permanent water at a permanent level, which has also been allowed to spread out into wetlands. So now you got up there, instead of periods of what I call is rush and dust for river systems, is you've got this permanent wetland that's seen an explosion of bird life, not only just the quantity, but also the species that are there. And that would go for all the sort of, other flora and fauna as well. So if we can sort of get development in North, we can have two great things going for us. Is one is economic development and growth for the people up here. The other thing is we can actually enhance the environment.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Don't disagree.
Just moving forward, with the voice, how much sort of flack did you get in regards to, and how difficult was it for you to prosecute the case amongst the people you'd normally engage with in the years previously?
Yeah. Look, I didn't cop much flack directly. Warren Mundine and Jacinta Price were the face of the voice. That's a nice term. They were the face of the voice. They were the face of the voice campaign. I was certainly writing articles and putting my opinions forth when the inspiration struck, but I wasn't out there as much on the front line. I certainly went to a few places talking. So I'd have to say generally, apart from a bit of social media back and forth with people yelling at you, it generally wasn't that bad for me. So that answers the first part of your question. Did I cop much flack? Not a great deal. Um, and as for people who knew me personally, who worked with me, I had their respect. I don't know what they were planning. Some of them I know were voting no. Um, but the ones within my circle were generally fairly respectful of me.
The other thing I've also noticed that seen you on in ITV in discussions. I think there's usually four of you around the table, and there's sometimes a little bit argy-bargy sort of thing. And you often of a different opinion than the rest of the table. How do things pan out sort of after you finish the show? Like, we're fine, we're going for a beer, or
Yeah,
uh,
look, with that last one, which was on, well, there was one on ABC about Australia Day, and that was generally very friendly. And we met each other beforehand, and we were told to keep it civil, and which we did. So that was okay. And so they do choose the people carefully and tell them that this is what we're after. Other places, other things I've done on NITV and that sort of thing, you'll be there on the panel with them, and afterwards, you'll say good night. There'll be a friendly good night, but you're not going to hang around with them because um, they'll have three or four of them together,
yeah.
and I'm the odd one out, sort of thing. Uh, but so there's a pleasant obligatory good night, and off I go.
Okay. That's good. Have you ever ventured on to question Q&A?
Yes, I was on there once a couple of years ago, and I have to say the ABC staff were right from start to finish, very professional, very respectful, and nice. So I enjoyed that one, and I was a little bit disappointed. It was a night Stan Grant had off, and Stan has interviewed me before, a very intelligent fellow, but he had that night off, and David Spears filled in for him. And David Spears was lovely, very professional. And so yeah, that was quite nice. And there were opposing views, but it was done in a friendly. Man, I think I was the only person with Indigenous ancestry on that night. Um, but yeah, that went well also.
I suppose also they probably didn't cut you off as much as they cut off someone who's from the Liberal Party or something like that, that they
Oh
want
no, well
to.
actually, having said that, there was one occasion with NITV, and I forget whether it might have been something about Welcome to Countries or something, and I couldn't help but notice there were a couple of panel members who were given far more time, asked more questions, were able just to waffle on with BS. There were a couple of them who told us that they were uh, cultural educators, whatever that means, and they just waffled on with word salads. Were given a lot of time. I wasn't given as much time, so I was disappointed on that occasion.
As we move through this period, we've had the voice that got defeated, but now the new government's in. I'm sure people will be re-weaponised in that. There's been a reasonable amount of discussion about welcome to country and that. And I think most Australians would agree that it shouldn't be ubiquitous as it is.
No,
It should be for special occasions, and I don't think people have got any problems with it. But just last night, I went to a public meeting on basically on crime in and how to deal with it. It was more actually. I don't know why they do this. It was about victims of crime, but it always turns into how much we've got to do for the offenders and
yeah,
how they're going to change the system to improve the lot for the offenders. Uh, so I wish they just wouldn't use the victim as crimes as a label for these discussions. They should just be a bit more honest about it.
yep.
But it was at the council building, so we've got to have a welcome to country. And fortunately, there was the MC just held it to the one and specifically pointed that out. We don't need it, which was good. And because it's also dealing with Indigenous sensitivities around crime, because the general perception is that the the high rate of juvenile crime, at least up in this area, is predominantly from Indigenous juveniles and that. Um, and to a degree, it's stifled some of the conversation and it steers the conversation. But the thing I noticed as the presentations wound down and we went to question and answers and to uh, people to contribute, the conversation, of course, there was Indigenous people there. Before each spoke, they acknowledged country and stuff like that. And then they wanted to talk about truth telling. We have to have truth telling. Well, yeah, I understand that, but do you think this fixation with truth telling is a healthy thing for
Well,
everyone?
they need to define it, define the scope, and I'm guessing probably the big issue for them is talking about colonization, which has been spoken about before many, many times. We all acknowledge the British arrived and we know what happened. Certainly there's variation in accounts, and if people want to bring that up again, they can, but there should be a balanced view about what happened. Um, and so that's one truth they want to get out there. I don't know what the other truths are. They need to be able to define those, but we also need to talk about some truths about high rates of dysfunction and violence in communities as well. And if they want to say, well, that's due to colonization, blah blah blah, that's fine. But there's going to be people like me who give counter arguments, and that's my version of the truth. That many Aboriginal people don't engage in violence. It's only in certain hotspots that it's the case.
I think it's a great mechanism to sort of uh, basically put other speakers on the back foot and be very careful about choosing the words rather than sort of getting to the nitty gritty that needs to be done to fix the problem. Um, I think it sort of disarms most of the people who have legitimate concerns and also good suggestions of ways to go forward. And I think that's a problem. If the criteria before we start is we've got to have all this truth telling.
Yeah, define what it is and what the purpose is, and who's going to be telling the truth, and yeah, that sort of thing.
But I do see it as a means to sort of make the other parties tread carefully in regards to what they're engaging in. Um, but like I say, it also stops the proper conversation in regards to things we have to fix. And it can only really be fixed by the Indigenous people within their own communities to openly sort of accept the issues that before in their communities and what they need help in rectifying it.
Yeah. And one of the ways we do that, the main way we do that is focusing on the here and now. What can we do now to make things right? Don't harp on about colonization.
I think also one of the other things is we don't use the tools that we have got and have had for ages. I mean, school attendance is still an issue.
Yeah.
Um, and And I think it's all around now. I mean, when I was a kid and that, they used to have truant officers, and boy, if the truant officers turned up at your house, everyone in the bloody neighbourhood would know it. And being truant could be just a matter of wagging a school for one day.
Hmm.
So it was sort of out there, but we don't seem to have that truancy control for anyone anymore. I
Hmm.
mean, Indigenous or non-Indigenous, the the fact that people miss school on a regular basis doesn't seem to be as well policed as it used to be, and I think that's a detriment to everyone.
I agree. And, maybe it's, I don't know, a leftover from the COVID era or whatever, but school needs to be taken seriously, school attendance. And of course, at the other end too, we need to be serious about schools, making sure that they are quality schools, well staffed, good teachers, teachers who are trained, teachers who are ready for those positions. When we look at remote schooling, we want the best teachers there. We want teachers who are experienced, not new, fresh graduates who might struggle. Of course, there's going to be exceptions, but generally speaking, I think in remote areas, you really need someone who's been experienced, has experience in that area. So yeah, there's no denying, even though the world's changing, with AI and that sort of thing, it would still seem to be the case that a good education, absolute minimum year 12 or possibly year 10, going to do a trade or something. School's not the only way to get an education. There's pathways to TAFE and colleges and universities, but you do need that foundation of a good education.
And I think that's probably one of the big things. I mean, probably going out 15 years ago, a bit more than that, the focus become on, we got to be the smart country and everyone goes to university. I think all these good intentions have consequences, and not for the best. There's because there's a lot of boys in particular who don't really engage in the academic side, but but we're denying the opportunity to have that. We used to have technical high schools and things like that, and we need to go and reinvest in those sort of things because that gives those people, and it seems to be especially boys, and it doesn't matter if you're Indigenous or non-Indigenous, there's plenty of boys who sort of just can't knuckle down to academic life, but they've got other talents that can be fostered.
Uh, for sure. I was reading something recently, yeah, about the boys are struggling. There are some Catholic schools who are doing some good work in that area, but it is a problem that does need a bit of focus. And, my message to young boys out there, you do need a good, solid education, or otherwise you're going to be left behind.
But the other thing is too, you're tied to a university in that. Do you think the universities could do more in regards to have ensure that the curriculums in the high school are a little bit more tailored to a lot of other different needs than what they're doing at the moment? I mean, there's a national curriculum, but I'm sure the university and that all the different universities have input into it. Do you think educators and that need to be a little bit more circumspect of the different capabilities of people, especially children?
Yeah, I think, universities certainly play a part with teacher training and that sort of thing. But I think, curriculums, I don't know how much influence a university has over curriculum. Certainly there'd be some advisors from within university. Um, but universities should start to focus on looking at, look at long-term trends, do the research, build a case for, these are the declining standards. What are we going to do about it? We do need to change the curriculum radically. So they can do the research, give advice, but as to who implements that advice, that's probably more of a government problem, a
Yeah.
responsibility of government.
I think also employee organisations should have a lot more say in regards to the skill sets they need to come out. And I mean, we're suffering from a deficit at the moment of tradespeople and that. We should never have got into this situation where we didn't have that focus for those people to come through in those trades you always go to need. You always go to need an electrician. You always go to need a plumber. You always go to need a carpenter. The roofers. I mean, all those sort of things out there. And we've let that escape from us for some reason.
Yeah, and I don't know why that is. This is not my field, but maybe it's not seen as being an attractive job. Um, Maybe there's been too much of a push for you've got to go to university, and not everyone does have to go to university, nor should have to go to university. But yeah, certainly more informed people than I could talk about why that is the case.
Now, one thing we're going to have now that we've got the Albanese government back in with a bigger majority, we're obviously going to have some more movement in regards to uh, sort of de facto voices and things like that. But we're also going to have a lot more push in regards to native title and that. Um, Up on the Cape, obviously there's going to be a lot of there are a number of claims in already. There's going to be more, but sometimes I get the feeling in regards to the driving force for, especially for the Labor side of it, for encouraging native title and more handover in that. It's not for the benefit of the Indigenous people, but the opportunity to lock up land and satisfy people like in the UN and that. Because uh, if they go ahead with this uh, environment protection side of it, uh, the focus is going to be close up land. I don't think that helps Indigenous people on the Cape, which is a major concern as we go forward.
So yeah, it is a major concern, and I'm fearful of what can happen. Certainly, some guidance is needed for this, so that wrong decisions aren't made. Um, but yes, it's not an area that I've spent a lot of time in.
I just think there should be just a bit more discussion about it, and sort of. Yeah, the other thing is too, we notice that in a lot of instances, claims are made, and then other groups sort of object to it, other Indigenous groups, because the group that's claiming it wasn't really belonging to the area beforehand and things like that. How do you see us navigating the future in regards to people who identify as Indigenous, but sometimes you scratch your head and wonder, like
Mm.
the people like Pasco and those sort of things. How are we going to navigate that as we go forward?
Yeah, look, I've spoken about this before in the past. I don't get anywhere. You just get criticism. Um, we have this definition, this three-part definition, which perhaps should be revised. The three-part definition talks about having some ancestry there, identifying and being accepted as such, and that's a fairly loose definition. Um, you you talk about it, you get shot down. It's one of those things where we may have to let it just happen, and certainly we can talk about it. When there's some strange, suspicious, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, people get some jobs. Bruce Pascoe, for example, where he's been questioned a lot. I don't think he's ever answered, but he's been questioned a lot. So when you have cases like that, you have a academic who gets a job as a professor at a university and their ancestry is questionable. They have little or none. We possibly have to allow that to happen. But if people want to talk about that, they should be free to talk about that and say, why has this person got this job when they can't prove that they have any Aboriginal ancestors? So at least make it public and talk about it. But as how you can put a stop to it, I'm not quite sure. And I do prefer to spend my energy in other areas in Indigenous affairs, simply because I know that with this one, it's an emotive topic, and some people just don't want to talk about it, especially those ones who do have minimal or no Aboriginal ancestry. They come up with all these arguments. Well, I know in my heart, blah, 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 blah. And it's hard to have a conversation when that's their
So,
argument.
what areas do we need to focus on, do you think we've got to give some primary attention to improve the situation with disadvantaged Indigenous people, because there's a lot of Indigenous people. They're at no disadvantage. I mean, they've had the same access to schooling, same access to service, same access to opportunities.
Yeah. So
Uh,
look, something I've mentioned many years ago, and the anthropologist Peter Sutton spoke to me about this, mentioned this to me. He's got a good book. Well, he's got a book debunking Dark Emu. I highly recommend that one, and his other book, Politics of Suffering. But we were chatting about the need to close the gap between those Indigenous people who are doing well that you just mentioned and those Indigenous people who are not doing well. It was a long time ago. Peter and I discussed that. And so rather than focusing on the gap between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people, which I call the between gap, we focus on the gap between those Aboriginal people doing well and those Aboriginal people not doing well, what I call the within gap. So those Aboriginal people who are not doing well, we got to give them, make sure that they have what those well-off Aboriginal people have. So focusing on those Aboriginal people where need is most, and that's generally speaking. Of course, there's many exceptions, but generally speaking, as we said earlier on, in those areas where there's less opportunity, in those remote areas, focus on helping those first is the best way to go. So, if you have any community, if you want to lift the average of the income or whatever, you deal with the lower end. That's going to be the best way to lift the average. Does that make sense?
yes,
Yeah, you don't.
and that goes for a lot of communities in regards to you should be looking at the needs, not just the service that are brought out. Like there's so many services that they just you get it regardless whether you're rich or poor. Uh, Taxpayers' money has got to be used better than that and sort of always be directed to needs in the first instance when it comes to people's personal situations. I mean, yes, the government's got to spend money on developing that and improve the economy for everyone. But when it comes to addressing people's needs, it's the people with the needs that have to be looked at first
Yeah.
and lifted up
So it needs to
or
be more
given a
focused.
hand.
Yeah, needs to be more focused. And like I said, I've been talking about that for a long, long time. And in recent times, have hopped on board and spoke about this closing the gap between those who are not doing well and those who are doing well, which is good.
Well, we should be we should be going to Canberra and talking to all the people who are Indigenous there,
Mm,
and saying, well, how do we get the people who are not doing so well, Indigenous people who are not doing so well, to how do we lift them up towards something towards your level?
yeah. And again, this is the sort of thing Tony Abbott was speaking about many, many years ago. So it's always been there. We've always known, but for whatever reason, doesn't get done.
Well, I still think there's a lot of opportunities to improve the lot of regional Australia, and by doing that, you actually improve the lot of a lot of Indigenous people as well. If the regional Australia gets the investment uh, to develop and create new wealth.
Agreed.
Um, Going forward, what's your sort of things that you're going to be dealing with, say, in the next 12 months and medium to long term? What's your course from here?
For me personally, what I'll be doing,
Yes.
it'll be business as usual. I have a few things to keep me busy during the day. I'll write articles. I'll put my opinion out there as the inspiration strikes when there's a topic which captures my interest. And sometimes in Indigenous affairs, there's a few things happening, but none of the things capture my interest. I am writing a book, writing a chapter. There's two things I'm writing. I'm writing a chapter for a publication celebrating Quadrant's anniversary. I've got a chapter in there on Aboriginal affairs, and that'll just sort of capture most of my thinking, a lot of what we've spoken about. I'll be busy doing that. And I'm also writing another um, more general book about being an effective helper, how non-professional people, non-therapists can be effective helpers. If you feel your calling is to help people, you want to work with people, but you're not necessarily a psychologist or a psychotherapist, how you can be a non-professional and still be an effective helper. So I'm writing a book on that as well. So mental health has always been an interest of mine, which we didn't get a chance to talk much about, but I publish articles on mental health as well. So I'm very concerned about the community, about promoting good mental health.
Uh, just touching on that, I think one of the things that are really needed in Indigenous communities, and actually all communities, is mentors, good grounded mentors who can, you know, on a one-to-one basis, help develop a person, but also to a group thing as well, help a
Yeah.
specific group within their own sort of area, localized area and that. But do you think there should be, like what you're thinking of there of helping people, do you think there should be more investment in people who to be mentors and things like that to a variety of people, male, female, Indigenous, non-Indigenous, because it's
Yeah,
something that seems to have disappeared over time.
yeah, absolutely. But mentors, rise naturally through the ranks in communities. So I'm more about let's make communities more vibrant, more healthy. And when you have that, you'll have wise people step up to the role of mentor, elder, or whatever you want to call them, who can then pass on their knowledge.
Just in regards to mental health, um, do you do you think that mental health is as a sort of ratio percentage is it any worse in the Indigenous groupings as non-Indigenous? Because I get the feeling that there's, post-COVID and that there seems to be a greater emphasis and identification of people with mental health problems. I mean, it's got to the stage where I think they're trying to say that, just about one in every five person's got a mental problem or a mental health issue.
Yeah.
I find that a little bit high,
Yeah.
and
Well, look,
certainly unhealthy for a society to be that high.
yeah, we do live in stressful times, so, cost of living, all that sort of thing. So it is harder for us. And certainly, you asked me about Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal people. It would seem that poorer mental health is correlated with poverty. So, and generally speaking, Aboriginal people, on average, have a lower income, have lower access to money. Although, we've got these land councils with a heap of money, but we'll save that for another time. So you got that issue there. In addition, the other thing that's impacting on Indigenous people as well is what we spoke about earlier on, where they are constantly given this message that they are victims of the white man, they are victims of the system, that racism is rampant everywhere, and that you should only get help from Aboriginal people because they're the best ones to help you, blah, 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 blah. When that, all of that is unhelpful. So letting Aboriginal people know, hey, there are many successful Aboriginal people who have done very well. You can be just like them. And we spoke about the formula for success earlier on, where the formula for success for Aboriginal people is exactly the same as the formula for success for non-Aboriginal people.
Okay, Anthony, look, we've just gone over the hour. I really appreciate your time. Maybe we could come back in a few months' time after the election settled down,
Yeah.
and things are in train, and we can get a bit of a picture where the government's going, especially in regards to things affecting Indigenous people, and have another discussion then. I'd really appreciate that.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, look, thanks for your time tonight. I really appreciate it. If you could just stay on and stay there for a second, I'll introduce next week's show and just have a quick conversation with you offline, if that's okay.
Sounds good.
Right, thank you, Anthony. If you enjoyed tonight's show, please like, share, and subscribe to our Facebook page and subscribe to our YouTube channel. My guest next week will be Trent Toomey. He's the president of the Pharmacy Guild Australia, and we'll be discussing the increasing role of pharmacies and pharmacists in our medical health system, from that's sort of taking or help take some of the load off GP visits, and especially in regards to reissuing prescriptions for a longer period, and those sort of things, also providing more service in regards to injections and vaccinations and that there. So yes, so please join me next week when I speak to Toomey. Thank you.